Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're just waiting for the clicker. So just wanted to quickly come up with a talk which is very practical. I don't want to spend too much time on talking to you about Amazon Web Services. I wanted to share some lessons that I learned myself from the startups that are working on Amazon Web Services, from their growth and how they've been now creating as established companies. So Amazon itself started as a startup in the 90s, right? So we innovated in many different things, like Amazon.com. Now it's a pretty straightforward business, but 20 years ago it wasn't that much. If you think about Kindle, it was about the same. But the best innovations Amazon did were the ones that allowed people to build their own businesses, right? So it was platforms that were reused by other people. So those were the best platforms and the best innovations of Amazon. The first one was obviously the Amazon Marketplace. Anyone can sell everything on Amazon, on Amazon.com, on Amazon.es. Then the Kindle bookstore. So now everyone here can be an author. You can write a book and publish it directly through Kindle and keep 70% of the royalties. And Amazon Web Services, it's exactly the same now for IT. So I met many startups here. Many startups are running already here on Amazon Web Services. So for those who don't know, you can think about Amazon Web Services as a kind of a set of building blocks for any kind of IT system. So the whole concept of Amazon Web Services is roughly what we saw in the startup was presenting the car sharing system. You only pay for what you use. There is no upfront cost, so there's no entry cost for you to use the system. And it's available on demand, a little bit like electricity. So going back to the topic of the growth, obviously this is, in a startup event like this, it's kind of pretty straightforward to say that innovation is hard. But why it's hard is because it's very difficult to understand when you need and where you need to innovate, right? Because your customers and the users are not going to tell you what they need, right? Because otherwise, if people knew what they need, it would not be disruptive. So that's where I came with the 6 rules for growth. So the startups who presented right now, they perhaps don't need what I'm going to say, but for the others, I welcome the feedback. The first one is kind of obvious, but it's always completely forgotten or misinterpreted, is the focus on your customers. So the way we got it at Amazon is to kind of do everything backwards from the customer. You don't think about, for example, the product that you're going to sell. First, you write the press release, right? That is, what is the publication you are going to give to the press the day you are going to announce your product? Second, you write your FAQ because you're going to have questions, right? And then you write the user manual if it's needed, right? Notice that in none of those steps we started building anything. And this is how we've been doing from day one on all the different services that Amazon released. Okay? The second one is the experimentation. And unfortunately, I met many startups who are not experimenting frequently enough. They have an idea. They think it's perhaps the best way to do it. But for every problem, you should have multiple solutions, right? If for a single problem you only have one solution that you want to try, something is wrong. You should at least have 3 or more, right? And those are going to be different hypotheses that you're going to test and that you're going to try, and the results should be based on real metrics, on real data, not just in your gut feeling. So this is something that has been pretty well done by a company called Supercell. They are pretty famous now for one of the most popular games they are selling in the App Store. It's Clash of Clans. And one of the interesting feedbacks from this idea was to separate the decision process from the evaluation of the outcome of the idea. If I have an idea right now and I want to implement it, it's going to be my baby, it's my idea, I definitely want it to succeed, because if my idea fails, it's myself who I'm failing, right? So the idea here was to separate the initialization of the idea itself, the implementation, from the decision of who is going to check if it's going to be successful or not, right? So you will have completely unbiased feedback on this. The third one is something that we see a lot in the marketing field, is to always measure everything you have, because if you don't measure, you cannot manage it, right? And improve on the iterations you are doing. So this guy is kind of one of my heroes. He's an engineer, and his name is Lord Dyson, and he designed 5,000 different prototypes of the vacuum cleaners that are now well known everywhere in the world. So imagine yourself doing 5,000 prototypes of your startup or different aspects of your startup before going to production. So this is what he did for physical object, right, which is a vacuum cleaner. So if you can do it with a physical object, you can definitely do it with an IT service that is available on the cloud, right? And to give you an idea of the speed of iteration you can reach, roughly at Amazon.com, which is also the same platform for Amazon.es, there's something like every 12 seconds we push a version or a new update into the production system. So this is an upgrade that is touching something like roughly 10,000 servers, 10,000 nodes. And we're not the only ones doing it. Etsy is also running on Amazon Web Services, so it's let's say it's an e-commerce website for vintage objects. And they do roughly one update every 20 minutes. The point here is that you want to test your small hypotheses and push them as fast as possible to your audience, and then measure what they do. Once you measure what they do, this is when you can take decisions. But if you do it too slowly, if it takes you like half a year to push an update, you're not going to have the feedback fast enough, right? So the second point of the environment, you need an environment that is giving you metrics and that is giving you feedback, right? Every morning I'm taking the car to drive my kids to school. I've been a driver since now probably more than 20 years. It doesn't make me Michael Schumacher, even if I've been driving a car for 20 years. It's because the environment didn't give me feedback on how I could enhance my system or my driving behavior. So you absolutely need not only feedback, but also measures. So a consequence of this is you have to be able to move extremely fast. But to move fast, you have to be nimble, right? So you see big corporations that sometimes are very painful to move. So the thing here is that you always have to keep in mind as a startup is the speed of the iteration will always beat the quality of iteration. Let me quickly explain. There's a very well-known psychology test that has been done in the early 2000s. In many universities, they took a group of students that had nothing to do with art, like, for example, students that were studying finance or mathematics, and they asked them to build a tea clay pot. And they divided the students into groups. One group, they told them, you have all the time you want to build the clay pot, right? But just build one, and it has to be as best as you can. And the second group, they tell them, hey, you guys have only batches of 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, you can build as many clay pots as you want, but you only have 2 minutes. So guess what? The group who produced the best quality was the one that only had 2-minute iterations, because they were able to do many failures and try again multiple times to perfect their outputs, right? So at Amazon, we have a concept that is now very well known in many startups. It's what we called initially the 2 pizza teams. So if you need more than 2 pizzas to feed a team, your team is too big, right? So, okay, it can be a silly way to measure it, or like 2 empanadas, whatever. But the point is, the break-even point is, if your team has more than 5, 6 members, communication is going to be difficult among team members, and they are not going to be able to move fast enough, right? So you always want to keep very small teams in your organization. And this is something that has been also well applied by Airbnb. So Airbnb is now a very well-known company. I don't know if we can call them a startup anymore. They are completely running on Amazon Web Services. The interesting point here is that the operation teams of Amazon Web Services, so the IT operation team, is only 5 people, right? So for an organization who is maintaining this scale, that is 300,000 of customers per day sleeping in locations offered by Airbnb, only 5 people, is pretty staggering, right? And this gives you an idea also of the scale you can achieve when you're using cloud computing services. Another example that comes to mind is Pinterest has a team of only 10 operation people. I think one of the best ones is perhaps Instagram, who only had 2. So that's the kind of things you can achieve when you have this kind of a scale effect of running on the cloud infrastructures. The fifth one is sometimes cultural, is to embrace failure and to make failure something that can definitely happen. So the key thing is everyone loves success, of course, because, I mean, we are proud to be successful. But actually, failures are making us better because we can definitely learn from the failures, right? The thing is that to be able to accept failure, failure has to come without risk. So you have to be able to fail quickly. If you wait too much, failure is going to be expensive, right? Because it's going to be expensive to come back to your decisions. And you have to fail with extremely low cost. If it's expensive to fail, people will fear, will freak out, and they will not try to move on the project, right? So Pinterest and Spotify are two other well, not startups now, no, two other companies that are running on Amazon Web Services, and they're really experimenting this kind of failure concept. And one of the ideas was, you know, when we fail, we all know the concept of doing a post-mortem to try to analyze what went wrong and what can we learn from that. So one of the things I would recommend you to do is to do the exercise of a pre-mortem. Okay? So the idea is you gather your team, and you go through the exercise of trying to imagine what can be wrong. Okay, so just do it for 10 minutes. Imagine all the ways your company or your activity can go wrong, and then it's going to give you really good hints on what are the things you should look for, right? So the key thing, as I mentioned earlier, but worth repeating, if you want to increase the innovation, if you really want to continue innovation and to remove fear to kill the innovation, you have to lower the cost of failure. If it's too expensive to fail, people will not take the risk, right? We've all been speaking with VCs. You know how risk-averse some are, but in the teams, it's exactly the same. If, for example, I will need $500,000 to build an IT cluster who's going to do like DNA analysis and so on, it's going to be perhaps too risky to do it, right? But if it comparatively, it's like $1,000 per day, well, this is something that is worth trying. So, last point, perhaps one that is often overlooked as well, is to focus on your business. And this implies that you can precisely define what is your business, right? So the story of IT and the story of engineering, and even broadly in human civilization, has been done by building on top of what the others built before us, right? And just to illustrate what I mentioned earlier is I wanted to really focus on one important strategy for startups is to write a to-don't list. We all do to-do lists. What are the things we need to do? But you also have to make clear what are the things you don't want to do because it's not your business, right? I wanted to come with two examples. Two companies that are using also Amazon Web Services, Dropbox and the NASA. Dropbox, I think, is pretty well known here as well. Dropbox, believe it or not, they are not in the business of storing your files. It's not their business. If you're using Dropbox today, technically you're using Amazon S3, right? Dropbox is in the business of making you easier to share the files and to exchange them with other users, but not on storing the files. The NASA is quite similar. NASA is probably one of the organizations that has the best engineers in Earth, right? Those guys, they definitely know how to build data centers. We're not going to teach them anything. But still, for missions like Mars Rover and the JPL Lab, they are using Amazon Web Services because it's not their business to do IT. Their business is to ship rockets to Mars and so on. So really, on your startup, make sure you understand what is your business, and the rest, it shouldn't be your business. Either outsource it or use another provider, but don't focus on it. Don't spend your energy on it. So those were the 6 main rules I wanted to focus on. Before closing, I just wanted to focus that innovation or growth is not a goal. It's, let's say, an ongoing process, an iterative process. And perhaps the most important one, perhaps for the next presentation, it will be the 7th rule. It's to be patient, right? So we all want to see startups that succeed very quickly, that ramp up, that have the proverbial hockey stick effect as quickly as possible. But the truth is that things take time. For most of the services we released at Amazon, it took us roughly 4 to 5 years to be really ready to production and start to see some benefits from those. So with that, just also wanted to mention that we have a program to help startups from the technical IT perspective called AWS Activate. And I also wanted to thank you for your attention. If you have any feedback or comments, feel free to contact me. Thank you.